Melissa. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Raphael. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. We have, for those watching here for the first time, we have Melissa Han, who is representing the United States. And the idea of this project is to create a space to invite international experts in business in different markets around the world to talk about the cultural and communication aspects of doing business in their countries. So, for all the interviewees that I've been working with, we ask the same seven questions, and we will start now, Melissa. The
Sounds
first
good.
question, thank you. The first question is tell us a little bit more about you and what kind of work do you do, Melissa, please?
Sure. So I am an intercultural consultant and trainer. I am based in Los Angeles, and where I help people is in global teams. So collaborating, leadership, learning how to cooperate, give feedback, things like that. And I also work with people who are moving to the US. So that would include expats, immigrants, refugees, and international students. And I help them understand how Americans think and behave and communicate. And as I'll say a lot during this interview, there's a wide variety, of course. It's not that every American is the same, but I try to help people understand in general, in broad strokes, how we operate so that you can be more successful with us. I also teach intercultural communication at American University to their graduate students. And one more thing I should mention is that along with my co-author, Andy Malinsky, I am the author of a new book called Forging Bonds in the Global Workforce that just came out in 2024.
That's great. Thank you so much, Melissa. And for those watching, this project is to help business people, companies who are looking to expand to new markets, and the insights you can provide on how to understand how to do business with the Americans, right? How the Americans think in terms of business, and also the United States is a huge country. I lived there for many years. I know there's different cultural aspects in different parts of the country. So it's very important. So this interview, I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to hearing more from your experiences as well as your insights. And you're definitely a professional. You have the knowledge in this area. So we're very grateful for your participation. Thank you. So moving to the second question, what are some things you recommend people do or say when first meeting and speaking with a person who they might be interested in starting a project or business opportunity together in the United States? And also, what should they not do or say as well, please?
Sure. So I guess the first thing that you would want to take into account is the setting. If you are at a networking event, you have more freedom to kind of maneuver and introduce yourself. And in that context, it would be perfectly fine to let somebody know in a straightforward way that you are interested in talking to them further because you provide certain services or products, and you could introduce yourself that way, and you could exchange business cards, and then you could follow up later. Once you are at the meeting where you're following up, I would say that first of all, it's really important to be on time. Americans have, generally speaking, a pretty tight schedule. And so we really appreciate when people arrive on time or even a few minutes early. That's a sign of respect. And it's also a sign that you are responsible and reliable. So, especially at the first meeting, you want to make sure that you are on time. I would say that the intention of the first meeting is not really to close the deal. It's to establish a feeling of rapport that you are the kind of person that they would like to do business with. And it's your opportunity to show that you are competent and that you are somebody that they could trust if they were going to do business with. So you don't want to have a really hard sell. You don't want to be too aggressive, but you also don't want to be too relaxed either. You're trying to find a happy medium between friendly and efficient. So, in order to convey those messages, I would make sure that you smile. Smiles are really important in the US, even though some regions might be more smiley than others. You want to show that you are friendly and present and attentive. You want to make sure you have a firm handshake. You want to make eye contact, have a little bit of chit chat and small talk. That's a way to signal that if you had more time, you would really like to get to know them. And then you want to make sure you transition and get to the point. Now, if you are the party who has initiated this interaction, it's going to be up to you to steer the conversation. You don't want to make the potential client handle the conversation. So you need to be thinking about, okay, I said hello, we had some small talk, and now I need to tell you thank you for taking the time to meet with me, and you need to transition and start talking about what you can offer. Now, all of this is likely going to be in a verbal exchange. Unless you've arranged it ahead of time, I wouldn't come prepared with a full presentation unless that's the expectation that's been set. So you're going to have an open-ended, organic conversation. And it's really important to have some bullet points where you talk about what you have to offer, but spend most of the conversation actually asking them about what they need and really listening and responding to how you can meet those needs. After about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 30 at the most, if this is an initial conversation, it's going to be time to wrap it up unless the client is showing that they really want to keep going. The idea is that you're just planting a seed for a sort of business relationship to develop in the future. And so you want to exit gracefully before they start to feel like they've received too much information. You can emphasize to them that you can provide more details, that you want to continue this conversation, and then you can thank them and you can leave. The idea is that you're just getting started. In addition to the things I've already said, I would say that your whole goal here is just to signal that you're going to be good to work with. So you don't want to do anything to undermine that. These would be things like frowning, being too reserved or closed off is not going to help you with Americans because they'll wonder what you're hiding or they'll think that you're not going to be friendly. You also don't want to argue or be disagreeable in any way. Oftentimes, when you have a business relationship, the client might have misperceptions about how the business is going to go. And it's okay to gently correct them, but you don't want to be argumentative. You certainly don't want to talk down to the client. The last thing I would say is that you don't want to get too, what we would say, into the weeds. And that means having too many details too soon. Just the broad, high level description with a couple of concrete details or examples is usually sufficient. And if they want more, they'll ask. After that, you can always follow up later, tell them that, thank you for their time again, and you can see if you can then schedule subsequent meetings. But that first interaction is really just about establishing a feeling of goodwill and a possibility for the future.
Great insights. Fantastic. So many key insights to point out. This will be written down in the LinkedIn article. I'm going to summarize our interview, but a lot of key, very important points. And like I mentioned, I live in the United States, and I reinforce every point you said. I mean, I've seen that in these networking events, and it's very important. Somebody coming from a different culture, different country, to really take into these insights that you provided, because it's just the way things are done there, and it's very, very informative. Thank you so much, Melissa. Very clear. Thank you. Moving to the third question, we recognize that it's important to have a deeper cultural understanding of a local place when doing business there. What cultural aspects might be considered when doing business in the United States?
Oh, I'm so glad that you asked this, Rafael, because one of the things that I would recommend is to remember that the US is not only a big country, but it's a very diverse country and it's very decentralized. So you cannot take for granted that somebody in New York and somebody in Texas and somebody in Wisconsin are going to really approach challenges in exactly the same way. Even if, as Americans, we are pretty similar from state to state, it's important that you show appreciation and curiosity and interest for the local place. I can tell you, as an American who has lived in 4 different regions, that people really have a close identity and affiliation with their home area. And so if you show curiosity about that, it's really going to go a long way. Additionally, I would say that it's really important to pay attention to time zones. We have multiple time zones, and we have some parts of the US that do change our clocks for daylight savings, and some places don't. So it's really important to check before a meeting, not only where the business is located if you're having a virtual call, but also where the employees themselves are actually living. It's entirely possible that even if employees are based, say, in Chicago, the employees may not actually be physically located there. So you want to take the time to ask where people are located. I would also encourage you to remember that just because somebody has a Spanish surname or appears Asian or otherwise seems to be, from a different ethnic or heritage or linguistic group, you should not assume that they are not American. Americans come in all shapes and colors and sizes, and it can really offend people if you initially act as if they are not American. So you should just approach people speaking in English and treating them as if you think they're American, and they can let you know if there are more details to their story. Finally, I would say that it's important to know that we really value egalitarianism. Now, our society may not always be equal, but our egalitarian value means that we really look for people who treat others with dignity and respect at all levels of the organization. This is important for you if you're doing business with us, because you should treat everybody with courtesy, from the person who opens the door to the person who maybe checks you in at the front desk. If you meet somebody at a restaurant, you should really be courteous to the waiter or the waitress. And these types of signals, how you treat people in these very casual social interactions and in professional situations, is going to be a reflection of your character. So you should be mindful of how you are demonstrating that with everybody that you interact with whenever you are encountering people that you might want to do business with.
Fantastic. And it's a beautiful country because of the melting pot. It's a melting pot of people from all over the world. So you explained it very clearly, and it's very important what you said. You have to respect just because they look different, or their names are different. They are Americans, and it's this melting pot. And one thing you mentioned, which I can relate to when I travel a lot as well. You meet an American and when you go abroad, and they're very proud. They say, "Oh, I'm from California. Where are you from?" "I'm from California." "Or I'm from New York." Sometimes they say that before they say I'm from the United States. They say I'm from California. So it's really nice. It's very nationalistic, let's say, state-wise, right? So perfect. Thank you, Melissa. Moving to the fourth question, a little bit more to do with communications. If someone does not speak English, what do you suggest a foreigner do to be able to communicate more successfully with locals in the United States and to be able to do business there?
So the United States is very interesting when it comes to language because we actually do not have an official language. Many people believe that we do. We do at the state levels, but we don't have a national language. That being said, English is the de facto language for doing business for the most part in the US, unless you are tailoring your business to a specific community, like the Spanish speaking community or the Chinese or Arabic speaking communities. Because of what I said at the beginning of this interview about how we develop relationships verbally for the most part, it's going to be almost impossible for you to establish that connection if you don't speak English at all. That being said, if you speak English a little bit, enough to have an initial interaction, you can always just say, I apologize, I don't speak English fluently, so I brought my associate or my colleague with me to make sure that there's no sources of confusion. I don't think that many Americans would be comfortable having an entire initial conversation through an interpreter if you are the one who's trying to initiate the connection with them. And the reason is that, frankly, it's going to make them feel impatient. They would wonder why you didn't just send somebody who does speak English. At the same time, Americans are very accustomed to people, especially in more diverse regions like Miami or Los Angeles. We are used to hearing English spoken in many ways, and we're often not nearly as critical of people who are learning English as foreigners assume we will be. So you should not be afraid to speak with us imperfectly. Making that effort will actually be better than hiding behind a translator if it's not necessary. At the same time, I would say that if you do want to reach another community within the US, then it may actually be really important that you have a translator so that you get all of the nuances. For example, there are many different Spanish-speaking communities within the US, and they may also have different heritages. And so you shouldn't assume that you can take something from the Spanish that's spoken in Spain and that it will be meaningful in, say, Puerto Rico or in Arizona. So you want to make sure that you're always localizing and really talking to people before you publish anything. But in terms of verbal communication, I would say a little bit of effort in English is better than nothing.
Great. Yes, Melissa, fantastic. And there's a lot of options for service interpretation or services. Exactly. Especially if you have to understand the cultural aspects of the different cities. Perhaps, like you said, Spanish in Miami won't be the same as in a community in California or or Puerto Rico. So yeah, so I think it's important for the foreign company that comes in, the foreign business person, to understand where they're going to, where they're going to do business, which region, what community, and if they have to work alongside a local interpreter, at least in the beginning, is an option for them. So perfect. Thank you, Melissa. Moving to the fifth question. To get better results in visibility or sales, what are your recommendations on the most effective ways to do marketing for products or services in the United States? And this has a little bit to do with the channels, right? How do you reach people in different markets in the United States?
Yeah, so there are a couple of broadly used channels that I can recommend. We are a car-centric culture, so in many cities you can expect to see a lot of large billboards advertising products and services along the freeways and the highways. We also have a lot of marketing on, almost anything that can have it. So on the sides of buses, on bus stops will often have marketing. There may be marketing inside the subway system. We also have a lot of marketing through radio, through television advertisements, and especially in the past 10 or 15 years, increasingly on social media. Now, that's really broad. And so in order to decide where you actually want to use your limited marketing dollars, I would encourage you to do market research specific to not only the region and the demographic you're trying to reach, but your industry. There are going to be very different norms for how you would advertise a product or service if you're working with Silicon Valley, or you're working with Hollywood, or you're working with finance on Wall Street, or if you're working in, say, hospitality and tourism, or in the energy sector in Houston. All of these are going to be a little bit different. And so you'd want to really zoom in and find out exactly what the norms and the kind of common areas are where people tend to pay attention to marketing for your products and services.
Great. Yeah, a lot of options, very broad. But just to dive in a little bit in terms of social media, which ones do you suggest? Which are more used in the United States, the social media platforms?
There's a difference in generation. So you'd want to find out, first of all, who you're trying to reach, but there's a lot of marketing on Facebook and Instagram, and especially since the pandemic, a lot of people have moved to TikTok. Now, there's going to be different ways that you create advertisements for those platforms. The advertisements that you see on Facebook might just be a static ad, but on TikTok, it may actually be an influencer who is sort of embedding an advertisement for your product or service in their video that they create. So the videos themselves are meant to be more entertaining. So you'd want to contact, in that case, somebody like an influencer who knows their own audience and who can tailor the kind of pitch for your product or service to the people who are already following them.
Perfect. This helps if a foreign company comes and create a company page on one of these platforms. It depends on who their segment and audience is, but its social media is very used. Perfect. Thanks. The sixth question has to do a little bit more with empathy, right? Connecting people. So if a business partner in the United States wants to get to know you better, invites you to a local coffee, tea place, restaurant, or even a virtual happy hour, what are the kind of topics that people in the United States like to talk about that's not really related to business, for example? So it's really to create this link, this empathy with the foreign business person coming in.
Yeah, so the first thing I should say is that it's not very common, I don't think, for Americans to reach out to a business contact and say, I would like to get to know you better on a personal level. Let's go establish our relationship. It's more likely to happen in two kind of subtle ways. One way is through small talk. The more meetings you have together, the more details you will acquire about that person. In the initial few minutes of chit-chatting, gradually you'll get a sense of who they are as a person. The other way that this might happen is by you inviting or them inviting you to have something that's kind of like a business casual event, like golfing, for example, where you're actually golfing together and then you're going to make some small talk. Or they might invite you to, say, a sports event if they have tickets to sit in one of the fancy boxes. And these would be signals that I want to get to know you as a person. But it's hard for me to imagine Americans actually saying those words. So you'd have to pay attention to the signals, like, them saying, tell me about yourself, or them inviting you to an event. That being said, once you're at the event or you're having this conversation, Americans like to know about what your life is like. They are curious about where you're from, whether that's your country or your city, or what that environment is like and how it compares to the part of the country in the US that you're working with. They might be curious what your impressions are of the US, if you've been here before, if you like it, where you want to go. Sometimes they'll ask about family. Um, Increasingly, American families are very complex. There may be people who have no kids, who have, kids from multiple marriages. People might get married more than once. They might have elders living with them. So they might not try to ask too nosy questions about exactly what the family's like, but they might say, oh, tell me about your family. And that will be an opportunity for you to share. It's also okay to talk about your interests. So things like travel, your hobbies, if you've seen any movies lately, if you have pets, these are all seen as kind of non-controversial topics. I would not talk about money unless it's related to kind of broad statements about the economy or broad statements about sort of the things that your business might be working on. I would also not talk about politics, especially if you are not sure exactly where the American that you're talking to kind of falls on the political spectrum. And I would also make sure if you're meeting with if across genders that you're really clear that there's no indication of flirting or romantic intentions at all. Generally speaking, it's perfectly fine in most industries in most parts of the country for men and women to meet up professionally, but you still want to make sure that all the signals are very clear and that there's no accidental misinterpretation. So as you're talking, you want to make sure that you're almost having kind of a boring conversation, just talking about very straightforward things without leaving any confusion in your wake.
Perfect. Well noted. A lot to think about, but yeah, very, very clear. Politics, some other countries people I've interviewed also mentioned not talk about politics, at least in the beginning, to be on the safe side. So
Mhm.
very clear. Thanks, Melissa. Coming to the last question. What one word should everyone learn to say in English in the American context and why?
So the word that comes to mind for me is fine print. And fine print means two things. It means the very small font, the very small text size, but it also refers broadly to all of the details in the contract. And this is important because I think for I think the way that Americans do business can sometimes be confusing to people from other countries because at the beginning, it's so important to send signals that you're friendly, that you're nice to work with, that you're competent. And so, as an outsider, you might have the impression that this rapport is an indication of a kind of certainty and security in the business relationship. But that's not the case. Those are all signals that help you arrive at the final document. And the final document is taken literally. If there is any dispute in the future about anything that went wrong in the relationship or any source of disagreement, it doesn't matter what you recall from the conversation. If you have to go through any kind of arbitration or you work with your lawyers, the lawyers will look at the word for word exactly what was said and what you agreed to when you signed. So it's very, very important to recognize that there are kind of two stages when you build your relationship to do business in the US. And when it's time to sign the document, the rapport moment pauses, and then it's time to be very serious and take a legal mindset as you review all the stipulations and all the different clauses in the agreement. And at that point, if you have any doubt, you should stop and you should talk to a lawyer and you should raise your concerns at that moment. Once you have signed, it's very difficult to renegotiate that agreement. So fine print is critical. We have small talk at the beginning and then fine print. And those two things together, I think, encapsulate the American approach to business.
No, that's great. That I did not expect that, but I totally agree with you. It's if somebody watching this is a business person, a company looking to find partnerships and do business in the United States, it's important to take note of this. So, very good, very useful suggestion, Melissa. That's it, Melissa. Unfortunately, we have to end. Thank you so much for being part of this project. Thanks for sharing your insights, recommendations, experience. I hope this interview also benefits you and brings you opportunities for your business. Like I mentioned to those watching, we're summarizing this interview into the LinkedIn article. I will put the contact information for Melissa so you can reach out to her directly. Any final thoughts or recommendations?
I would say that you should not be too self-conscious when working with Americans. I know people are often worried about making a mistake. We're not judging you about whether you make a mistake. We're looking to see if you believe in yourself and if you have enthusiasm for what you have to offer. And that's going to be a lot more important than if you ever use the wrong vocabulary word. So if you're doubting yourself, I encourage you to go for it and get to know us and try to do business with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time, Melissa. Have a good day.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Raphael. Bye.
Well, thank you.